Spirit of the living God, fall fresh on us.
Spirit of the living God, fall fresh on us.
Over the last year of my beloved Stephanie's illness, I have found that very few people like to talk about death. So few are willing to talk about death that I have had to go outside our Christian tradition to find resources for myself that connect life to death. In these other traditions, especially in the Buddhist tradition, a full life is incomplete without death. To radically embrace life is to fully acknowledge and even welcome death. To live fully is to shed our fears of death, including clinging to life in any form. I find death, and even the proximity of death, brings me up short on what I believe and what it is that truly satisfies me. When I'm truly satisfied, I'm able to say, I have had enough, and I'm full of gratitude for and to God. We could limit our reflections today to today's gospel by taking literally the story and words about generosity. However, we lose much fruit from this gospel if we stay only with the literal words in the vineyard story. The gospel story is intended for one purpose: to point us towards heaven. The words of our opening collect today were, "Grant us, Lord, not to be anxious about earthly things, and even now, while we are placed among things that are passing away, to hold fast to those things that shall endure." In the second lesson, we are further reminded that living is Christ and dying is gain. The message of the gospel, I believe, is that the goal of our lives is to live in such a way that at any time when God calls us, that we will be ready and be able to say, I am full, I've had enough. So there are two laborers in today's gospel. The laborer who worked fewer hours and receives the same reward from the landowner is a symbol for all life that ends sooner than we would wish. Our focus must be to celebrate with and for the laborer with fewer hours. Imagine if at our ends we could say, I have had enough of life because I'm so convinced that this life has only been a passageway to life with God forever. Stay with me. For the last 5 years, I've been the founder and administrator of a Facebook group called Congregational Seasons. We started with a handful of people, and today there are 1,500 people throughout the Episcopal Church and beyond who are members of this group. I started Congregational Seasons for one single purpose only. And I know when I say it, you'll laugh. Some of you may even be uncomfortable. But I started it as sort of an obituary page for churches. Laugh. Several times a week, I post stories of churches from around the world that are closing as a reminder that even churches die and the new life of resurrection comes only through death. The church is only a vehicle of God's grace. It is not God's grace, and thus even churches cannot avoid death. Last week, one of my clergy colleagues in the diocese lamented on Facebook that I do not post enough stories of churches opening and flourishing. I reminded my dear colleague of my original purpose. And as many churches that I have posted over these 5 years, I still meet people who see only sadness in the decline and death of their church. Grant us, Lord, not to be anxious about earthly things, and even now, while we are placed among things that are passing away, to hold fast to those things that shall endure. Even churches are earthly things. I cherish the Benedictines of Weston Priory in Weston, Vermont, whom I visited this past summer, and their hymn, Earthen Vessels. The words of that hymn, the refrain goes like this. I won't sing it, I'll spare you that. We hold a treasure, not made of gold in earthen vessels, wealth untold. One treasure only, the Lord, the Christ. On Thursday, at 1 p.m., I left this campus after a short meeting in the morning with a few of our vestry advisors to go to Reno to spend a few days with friends. Typically, the drive takes me 2 hours. I loved the drive through the Tahoe National Forest. Thursday, the sun was shining, and it was a beautiful day for a drive. Around Bowman, I noticed a few drops of rain on my windshield, but I thought, no big deal. Then a few miles ahead, I began to see some clouds. Then as I drove closer to Baxter, the clouds became darker and the wind picked up. And there was a sign on the side of the freeway. You know those signs with chains, but there were no chains. Chain control was not in effect, but it said I was 22 miles from Truckee, and the sign said, 22 miles from Truckee, it will take you 2 hours to get there. And I was like, something must be going on. And with almost no preparation, I was in the middle of a heavy snowstorm, mixed with rain, ice, fog, wind, and yes, evening lightning and thunder. I wondered, how could it be that on September 20th, the last day of summer, that I was in the middle of a blizzard? Had I entered some twilight zone? I was stunned to disbelief, but there I was in the middle of probably the most severe storm that I have ever experienced in Tahoe due to the variety of concurrent conditions. I was driving only 5 to 15 miles per hour for that 22 miles. That's why they said it takes 2 hours to get there. I kept 3 to 4 car lengths, as is my custom during Tahoe storms. And even when I was driving 0 to 5 miles, my car involuntarily slid twice on the ice on Thursday. Usually that's due to my own dumb fault about how I brake, but this time I involuntarily slid and my mind went spinning like the car. Later Thursday evening, I heard on the news that one driver on the 80 East was killed when his car slid into another during the storm, creating a chain effect of 16 cars that were destroyed. Once again, I was reminded of the fine line we all walk between life and death. Our lives are full of sudden storms that come out of nowhere, and some of these storms bring about death. How many of us live believing with our whole mind, heart, and soul that living is Christ and dying is gain? So much in our society tells us exactly the opposite, that living is here and now and dying is a major loss and a total failure. I hope for those of you who are on Facebook that you have seen the many blogs that came out after Senator John McCain was diagnosed with brain cancer. Senator McCain has led a public awareness campaign that language like losing the battle to cancer is not helpful. So many blogs have challenged the language of loss and defeat. These blogs have reframed death, pointing all dying towards life. our gospel today, and our other accompanying lessons reorient our lives towards life with Christ in heaven. The purpose of our life here on earth is to prepare for our eternal life with God. To live completely into our eternal purpose, we have to change what we think about and how we encounter death. To do so, we have to live every day with a sense of our purposeful life in God and be filled with gratitude for every day we have to prepare for a more perfect end. And when our loved ones die or the communities we cherish come to their end, we are called to celebrate, even for the one who has put in fewer hours. It is so very challenging, I admit, to live life enjoying all the fruits and fullness that life brings, while at the same time not clinging to these transitory fruits. And when we do so, then we are even on a moment's notice in the mix of life's most unexpected storms, ready to say, "Yes, Lord, I am full of life. I am satisfied. I'm completely ready for you. I'm ready to follow you, even to the ends of the earth, even to my own human end." So, to my clergy friend who would like to see me post more about churches flourishing, that's admirable, as long as churches flourishing do not serve as a distraction to the reality of death and our desired resurrection through death. There's only one pathway to resurrection, and that is through death. Not one person lasts for a whole lifetime. Generation after generation, people die. Not one church that stands this day will meet the test of centuries. Every church will close. Every church will die. But that should not bring us grief. All the doctrines of the church and every spiritual practice find their most beautiful sense of fulfillment in seeing death only as gain. Few of us are able to live with the sense of complete, otherworldly surrender all the time. Nonetheless, as challenging as today's lessons are, we must engage our fears and also our resistance to dying and death that separate us from our life in Christ. So I got to Reno. I was safe. I lived. I'm here. And I saw my friend Carol Moore, my friend who manages Camp Care, a camp for children with special needs. You may recall that Camp Care was one of our outreach partners last year. Carol told me the story of one of their young campers. They have campers from very young to in their 50s. Carol told me about one of their young campers, a woman in her 30s, who recently died from multiple complications of cancer. Carol showed me a picture of this young woman a few hours before her death, and she had this huge smile on her face. Imagine the blessing to face any death that we encounter in our life's journey with a huge smile. To smile at our death is the grace that we each might pray to receive. And one of the ways we prepare to receive this grace is to live our entire lives full of gratitude and deep awareness that all we receive from God is always enough. In that moment, in that time, it's enough. The laborer who put in fewer hours and receives the same reward is countercultural. It is enough when we receive a day's wages and another who only worked an hour receives the same wages. At the end, the one who has put in fewer hours, along with the one who has put in many hours, are equal in God's eyes. They are equal, not due to anything they have done to deserve their reward, for the promise always was that their reward would be in God. To live in this way changes the way we encounter death, but it also changes the way we encounter life. Life and death are intertwined through our relationship with God. And when we dare sever death from our experience of life, then we also separate ourselves from the full life that God anticipated for us through Christ. I'm coming to the end. God has given us all we have, not to be satisfied in those things we enjoy, but as vessels that contain transitory grace. Everlasting grace cannot be achieved through earthen vessels, but only through the living Christ. To be truly satisfied is to yearn for Christ and the fulfillment that comes through death. And living in this way, we do not fear but revel in life's sudden storms that help us prepare for our ultimate surrender when our complete satisfaction is found only in God. To live in this way frees us up to be clear-eyed about the hierarchy of our satisfactions. We all need food, drink, and shelter to flourish. But at the top of our Christian satisfaction chart should be life with God whenever and however God draws us to God's self. God bless you. Amen.